Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. I am Dr. Sadia Zafar and today I will discuss about the environmental impact assessment. Environmental impact assessment emerged internationally after the 1972 Stockholm conference that is occurred in Sweden and is now recognized the internationally in Rio Principles in 1991. ESPO Convention. Principle 17 of the Rio Convention states environmental impact assessment as a national instrument shall be undertaken for proposed activities that are likely to have a significant adverse impact on environment and are subject to decision of the competent national authority. The background of Stockholm 1972. The United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm put environmental issues on the international agenda for the first time. Stockholm Conference laid the groundwork for progress in environment and development. One important outcome from Stockholm was creation of UN Environment Programme. Man is unlikely to succeed in managing his relationship with nature unless in the course of it he learns to manage better the relations between man and man. The definition of ESPO Convention, a national procedure for the evaluation of the likely impact of proposed activity on the environment. Environmental impact assessment under Environment Conservation Act. The Environment Conservation Act provided for Minister of Environmental Affairs and Tourism to identify those activities which, in his opinion, may have a substantial detrimental effect on the environment, whether in general or in respect of certain areas. In 1997, the minister circulated a list of identified activities and General Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations setting out the procedure to be followed by developers seeking the authorization for their activities. General Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations, which accompanied the list of identified activities, set out the process to be followed by applicant or developer. In short, this required the applicant to hire an independent consultant to carry out the procedure, which entailed the submission of a plan of study for scoping, including a description of the activity to be undertaken, the task to be performed during the scoping, and method by which environmental issues and alternatives will be identified, followed by a scoping report. The scoping report must contain a brief project description and brief description of the environmental issues that are identified and description of all alternatives identified and an appendix containing a description of public participation process followed, including a list of interested parties and their comments. Regulations in terms of environmental impact assessment had been in fact for little over a year when the National Environmental Management Act was enacted to come into the Act on 1st January 1999. The National Environmental Management Act accordingly repeated most of the provisions of environmental impact assessment. The 2006 Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations and the list of activities. There are three government notices. First is the regulations relating to the process to be followed, and second, the list of activities and competent authorities in respect of which a so-called basic assessment will be required, and third, activities and the competent authorities relating to those activities requiring scoping and environmental impact assessment. For example, one listed activity is the construction of facilities and infrastructure including associated structures or infrastructure for the storage of 250 tons or more but not less than 100,000 tons of coal. The 2010 regulations and list of activities. Publication of new environmental impact assessment regulations was accompanied by the publications of three lists of the activities for which environmental impact assessment is required, which came into effect on 2nd August 2010. The purpose of the regulations have been expanded to incorporate the objectives of the environmental assessment process, namely to avoid the detrimental impacts on the environment or where it cannot be avoided, ensure mitigation and management of impact to a acceptable level, and to optimize the positive environmental impacts. Environmental impact assessment, including the environmental parameters, potential impact on infrastructure development projects like Thana Road Project, Thana Irrigation Schemes, and, and many other projects. The environmental impact assessment and environmental protection measures. Environmental parameters include different components of the environment that can be grouped into the major components like ecology, physico-chemical, and human interest. Ecology includes the aquatic or terrestrial. In aquatic, that had the fisheries, eutrophication, aquatic weeds, species diversity, endangered species, while in terrestrial that have the forest, wildlife, species diversity, and endangered species. Physiochemical parameter that include the land, surface water, groundwater, and atmosphere. Physico-chemical parameters consisting of the land and surface water. Land like erosion and siltation, backwater effect, bank stability, drainage, and soil characteristics, while the surface water, like the regional hydrology, load, water pollution, and the physico-chemical parameters also depend on groundwater and atmosphere. Groundwater, like regional hydrology, recharge, water table, and water pollution, while atmosphere, like the air pollution, dust pollution, and noise pollution. Human interest, like health, including the diseases, sanitation, and nutrients, and aesthetic, like landscape and recreation. Human interest also depend on socio-economic, like land loss, crop production, aquaculture, irrigation, navigation, flood control, transport, resettlement, employment, and agro-industrial. Potential impact on environment. A change in system exerts certain influence on many different environmental parameters, resulting a net positive or negative impact on the environment. Impact on major infrastructure development objects such as Thana road projects and some other projects. Ecological impact, like fisheries that have negative impact on roads prevents the longitudinal and lateral migration of the fishes in flood plains. Obstruct movements of the fishes onto the natural feeding and breeding grounds in the flood plains. Forest, roads running through the forest area and plantation may be the cause of destruction of the trees in the forest and alteration of ecology of plantation. Roadsides may be used for plantation of trees, which is favorable impact of road construction. Wetland and wetland habitat. The road may encroach wetland, which may alter the ecology of wetlands and may cause destruction of wetland habitat. Eutrophication. Roads running through the forest area and plantation may be cause of destruction of trees in forest and alteration of ecology of forest. Erosion and siltation. Causes the erosion during flood and siltation in downstream. Draining, congestion, or water logging. Roads interfere with cross drainage and can cause flooding or drainage congestion in adjacent areas during periods of high precipitation that may cause crop damage, water pollution, and breeding of mosquitoes. Regional hydrology or flooding. Roads constructed across the flood plains perpendicular to the direction of the water flow cause backwater effect and increase the duration, frequency, and extent of the flooding in the upstream. Obstruction to wastewater flow. Roads may obstruct the drainage of sewage and industrial wastewater, leading to serious pollution problem. Dust or noise pollution. The dust raised from unpaved rural roads and blown by the vehicles can pose a health hazard and damage vegetation along the sides of the road. Loss of agricultural lands. Construction of any road is associated with loss of agricultural land. Generation of employment opportunities. Construction of road generates temporary employment during the project implementation and permanent employment during the maintenance phase. The navigation and boat communication. Road interference with navigation and boat communication at least for certain period of year. And commercial and service facilities. The Thana Road provide the benefit of fast communication, transport facilities, etc. Industrial activities. Road communication promotes the industrial activities. Irrigation facilities. Borrow pits by the side of the roads provide the facilities for small-scale irrigation. Landscape. Scattered borrow pits, unauthorized growth around the road, erosion result in marred or spoiled landscape. Environment impact assessment of the beneficial and adverse changes in environment resources or values resulting from a proposed project. What are the essential elements of environmental impact assessment? There are three main elements. First is the identification of possible positive or negative impacts of the project. And second is the quantifying the impacts with respect to common base. And third is preparation of mitigation plan to offset the negative impacts. What are the methods for the assessment? We can determine the environmental impact value by following the formula. Here in this formula, the VI is relative change of the environmental quality of parameters, while W is relative importance or weight or the parameters, and the N is the total number of environmental parameters. Quantification of environmental impact. We can quantify the environmental impact by choosing this graph. At 0, no change occur. At plus minus 1, very low change occur, and at plus minus 2 low and plus minus 3 moderate, plus minus 4 higher, and plus minus 5 severe changes of the environmental parameters occur. There are some references. Thank you so much for your attention.